The town of Blackwood sat in the throat of the valley like a piece of gristle the land could not swallow. It was late August, and the wind had teeth. It scoured the false fronts of the buildings on Main Street, peeling away paint and driving grit into the deep lines of men's faces. Here, dust was not just weather. It was a second skin. It coated the throat and settled in the creases of clothes. And along with it came the gossip, dry and abrasive, spreading faster than a sparks in dry sawgrass. Clara Voss walked against the wind with her head bowed, clutching a bundle of mended shirts to her chest. She moved with the economy of someone who knew that drawing attention was a dangerous luxury. She was a seamstress, a widow, and in the eyes of Blackwood, a woman who held herself too high for her station. She did not stop at the boardwalk where Mrs. Gable and the churchwomen gathered like crows on a fence line. She felt their eyes on her back, heavy and judging. They said she was too proud. They said a woman alone had no business refusing the company of decent men. They whispered that her silence was not modesty, but a secret arrogance. Clara knew the truth was simpler and far more brittle. She was 26 years old. Her husband was 2 years in the ground, and she had learned that in a town like this, a smile was often interpreted as an invitation, and an invitation was the first step toward ruin. She reached the general store and delivered the shirts to the clerk, taking the few coins that constituted her pay. She needed thread and flour, but she did not linger. As she stepped back out onto the wooden planks, a shadow fell across her path. Sheriff Harlan Crow stood there, his thumbs hooked into his gun belt. He was a broad man, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the way his eyes seemed to weigh everything they saw, calculating its value in leverage. He smiled, but the expression did not reach those calculating eyes. "Afternoon, Mrs. Voss," Crow said. His voice was a low rumble, meant to sound paternal to anyone watching, but Clara heard the edge in it. "Sheriff," Clara replied, nodding once but not stopping. She tried to step around him, but he shifted his weight, effectively blocking her path without raising a hand. "You are moving fast today," Crow said. "It is not safe for a woman to be rushing about alone, not with the cattle drive coming through next week. The town will be full of drifters, rough men. I can look after myself." "Sheriff," Clara said, keeping her voice level. She held her parcel of flour tight against her stomach. Crow leaned in closer. The smell of him was bay rum and stale tobacco. "That is just it." "Clara, you do not have to. I have told you. I can make sure no trouble comes to your door. A woman in your position needs a friend with authority. It is a hard world out there." Clara looked up at him then. It was the mistake she always made. She could not force herself to look at the ground when a man was threatening her, even if the threat was wrapped in the guise of kindness. "I appreciate the concern," she said, her tone clipped, "but I have work to finish. Good day. Sheriff?" She stepped around him this time, brushing past his sleeve. She felt his body stiffen. Crow did not like to be walked away from. He was a man who collected debts, real and imagined. And he had decided months ago that Clara Voss owed him something for the privilege of breathing air in his town. Refusal was dangerous. Clara knew that as she walked quickly toward the small, weathered shack she rented at the edge of town. But surrender was a slow death, a hollowing out of the spirit that she could not survive. She went inside, locked the door, and sat in the dim light, listening to the wind rattle the window pane like a restless ghost. 2 days later, the storm broke. But it was not the weather that changed. It was the mood of the town. A boy, Samuel Dillard, the youngest son of the largest rancher in the valley, was found dead in the wash of the dry riverbed. His skull had been crushed with a rock. Samuel was known for 2 things, his father's money and his own cruelty, especially when he had been drinking. But death has a way of scrubbing a reputation clean, and by noon, Samuel Dillard was a fallen angel, and the town was baying for blood. Clara was sewing a tear in a heavy canvas coat when the door to her shack burst open. Wood splintered and flew across the room. She screamed, standing up so fast her chair tipped backward. 2 deputies filled the doorway, dust swirling around them. "Grab her," one of them barked. Clara tried to back away, her hands raised. "What is this? What are you doing? You know what you did." The deputy sneered. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the tender flesh above her elbow. He hauled her forward, stumbling over her spilled sewing basket. Spools of thread rolled across the floorboards, red and blue and black, unspooling like frantic thoughts. Sheriff Crow walked in behind them. He did not look at Clara. He looked at the room. He moved to her small dresser, where her private life was folded away. A few letters from her mother back east. A ribbon her husband had given her. A locket. Crow swept his hand across the surface, knocking the items to the floor. "Search it all," Crow ordered. "I've done nothing," Clara cried out, struggling as the deputy twisted her arm behind her back. "I was here all night." Crow ignored her. He crouched near the spilled sewing basket. He paused, creating a moment of theater for his men, then reached down and plucked something from the tangle of fabric scraps. He held it up to the light. It was a silver money clip, engraved with the Dillard brand. "Found it," Crow said, his voice flat and satisfied. "That is not mine." Clara gasped, the air leaving her lungs. "I have never seen that before." "You put that there? Get her out of here," Crow said, turning his back on her. They dragged her out into the blinding afternoon sun. The town had already gathered. It was as if they had been waiting for this, hungry for a villain to make sense of the tragedy. When they saw Clara, a murmur went through the crowd, ugly and low. "I knew it," a woman shouted. "I knew she was no good. She is a black widow," another voice called out. "Probably tempted the boy and then robbed him when he would not pay." Clara stumbled, her boots catching in the dirt. The deputy shoved her forward. She looked at the faces of people she had mended clothes for, people she had bought grain from. There was no pity in them. There was only the sharp, hard glint of self-righteousness. Defending her would mean standing against the sheriff and the Dillard family. It would mean staining themselves with her alleged sin. So they watched, and they judged, and they let the hate rise. At the far end of the street, a rider sat atop a roan gelding that looked as tired as the man in the saddle. Elias Boone had been riding for 3 weeks straight, drifting down from the high country with the winter nipping at his heels. He was looking for day work, a hot meal, and water for his horse. He was not looking for trouble. He pulled the roan up as the commotion spilled into the main thoroughfare. He watched the scene unfold with the detached wariness of a man who had seen too many towns turn sour. He saw the woman first. She was slight, her hair coming loose from its pins, dragging in the dust. Her dress was torn at the shoulder where the lawman had grabbed her, but it was the way she held her head that caught his eye. She was terrified. He could see the white of her eyes from 20 yards away, but she was fighting the urge to crumple. She walked because she refused to be dragged. The deputy leading her yanked on the chain that now bound her wrists. "Move it!" he shouted, laughing as she nearly fell. Elias felt his hand tighten on the leather reins. The leather creaked, a small sound lost in the noise of the mob. His knuckles turned white. He had a code, battered and frayed as it was, that did not sit well with watching a woman treated like livestock. But he also had a survival instinct honed by years of living rough. He was a stranger here. Interfering now would only get him thrown in the cell beside her, or worse. He forced his breath out slowly through his nose. He sat still, a statue of a cowboy, as the procession passed him. For a second, Clara looked up. Her eyes swept the crowd, desperate for a friendly face, and landed on Elias. There was no pleading in her gaze, only a stark, human shock. It was the look of someone realizing that the world had gone mad. Then, she was shoved forward, and the moment broke. Elias nudged his horse toward the livery stable, his jaw set so hard it ached. He dismounted in the cool shade of the barn and handed the reins to an old stable hand who was chewing on a piece of straw. The man looked at Elias's saddlebags, noting the lack of silver but the well-oiled condition of the Winchester in the scabbard. "Quite a show out there," Elias said quietly, uncinching his saddle. The stable hand spat. "Reckon so. That is the Voss woman. Sheriff says she killed the Dillard boy. Does she look like a killer to you?" Elias asked, lifting the heavy saddle down. The old man shrugged. Does not matter what she looks like. Matters what Sheriff Crow says. He has been sniffing around her for months. Everyone knows she turned him down cold. Pride comes before a fall, they say. Looks like she hit the bottom today. Elias paused, his hand resting on the horse's warm flank. So she turned him down, and now she is wearing iron. That is the way of it, the man said. Crow promised her protection after her husband died. I guess he decided to collect on the promise one way or another. You want oats for the beast? Yeah, Elias said, his voice distant. And water. He walked out of the stable, the hunger in his belly replaced by a cold, heavy stone. He knew that story. He had seen it played out in mining camps and border towns. A man with a badge and a bruised ego was a dangerous thing. Clara sat on the floor of the cell. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the chemical reek of lie that failed to mask the scent of fear. The walls were scratched with names and dates, a calendar of misery. The door to the cell block opened, and Sheriff Crow stepped in. He did not bring the deputies. He pulled a chair over and sat outside the bars, looking at her with a calm, patient expression that made Clara's skin crawl. You are in a bad spot. Clara, Crow said softly. Clara pulled her knees to her chest. I did not kill him. I have never hurt anyone. Crow sighed, as if he were disappointed in a slow child. The town thinks you did. The Dillard family thinks you did. They are talking about a hanging. Clara, they are saying a woman who kills a man does not deserve a trial. Clara trembled. Then tell them the truth. Tell them you planted that clip. Crow chuckled darkly. Who would believe that? I am the law here. You are just a seamstress who thought she was too good for the company of her betters. He stood up and walked to the bars, gripping the cold iron. But I am a forgiving man. I can make this go away. Or, at least, I can make sure you do not swing. If you confess, I can promise you safety. I can keep you here, under my care. It would be a long sentence, but you would be alive. And I would visit. I would make sure you were comfortable. The meaning was clear. It hung in the air between them, gross and undeniable. He was not just arresting her. He was breaking her. He was offering her a life of servitude in a cage as an alternative to death. Clara looked at him, and for the first time, her fear was eclipsed by a white-hot anger. You want me to say I did it, so you can keep me in here like a pet. I want you to be reasonable, Crow said. I would rather die, Clara whispered. Crow's face hardened. Then you just might get your wish. He turned and left, the heavy door clanging shut behind him, sealing her in the dark. Elias spent the afternoon trying to do things the right way. He went to the saloon, not to drink, but to listen. He heard the men talking, their voices loud with liquid courage. They spoke of Clara as if she were a witch, a seductress who had lured the Dillard boy to his death. He asked a few questions, careful and quiet. Did anyone see her near the river? No, but she must have been there. Did anyone see the murder? No, but the sheriff found the proof. He found the circuit judge's clerk in a back room of the hotel, a man named Pritchard who smelled of gin and nervousness. Elias stood in the doorway, blocking the light. I hear there is a trial coming up. Elias said. Hearing, Pritchard corrected, wiping his forehead with a stained handkerchief. Swift justice. That is what the town needs. Is it justice if there is no evidence? Elias asked. Pritchard squinted at him. Sheriff Crow has the evidence. That is good enough for Judge Wilkes when he rides in. And it is good enough for me. You a friend of the accused? No, Elias said. Just a man who likes to see the cards dealt face up. Pritchard laughed, a nervous, wheezing sound. Son, in this town, the sheriff owns the deck. You best remember that and move along. Elias walked out into the twilight. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. He walked to the jailhouse. The deputy on duty was slumped in a chair on the porch, a hat over his eyes. Elias stepped past him before the man could rouse himself. He went around to the side of the building, where a small, barred window looked out into the alley. He crouched down. Ma'am, he whispered. There was a rustling of straw, and then Clara's face appeared at the bars. pale and ghostly in the gloom. "Who is there?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The man from the street," Elias said. "The one on the roan horse." Clara gripped the bars. "Are you one of Crow's men?" "No. Then why are you here?" Elias looked around the alley to ensure they were alone. "I tried to talk to the clerk. They are set on this. Ma'am, they are not looking for truth." "I know," Clara said. Her voice broke, and she swallowed hard to steady it. "I know what this is." Elias took off his hat, turning it in his hands. "I can pay bail. If they set it, I have got a little money put by." "Crow won't take it," Clara said. "It is not about money. He wants to own me. He wants to show everyone what happens when you say no to him." Elias looked at her, seeing the bruise forming on her arm where the deputy had grabbed her. He felt a familiar darkness rising in his chest, the old violence he kept chained up. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. He did not know why he was asking. He should be riding out. He should be halfway to the next county. Clara pressed her forehead against the cold iron. "I cannot ask a stranger to die for me." Elias did not answer. He just waited. "If you have got a decent bone in you," she whispered, "fierce and low, don't let them make a story out of me. Do not let them say I was a whore or a killer. I was a wife. I worked hard. I paid my way." Elias saw the tears finally spill over, tracking through the dust on her cheeks. "I came west with my husband," she said, her voice drifting. "We were going to raise sheep. He died in a rock slide 2 years ago. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. I thought if I kept my head down, if I worked, they would let me be. But they hate a woman who does not need them." "They don't hate you," Elias said softly. "They are afraid of you, because you are strong without them." Clara laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Look where strong got me." Heavy boots sounded on the boardwalk around the corner. Elias stepped back into the shadows. "I will be back," he said. "Don't," she said. "Just go. Save yourself." Elias slipped away into the darkness, but he did not go to the livery stable. He circled back to the main street. Crow was standing on the steps of the jail, addressing a small crowd that had gathered. "Hearing is set for 2 days from now," Crow announced, his voice carrying over the wind. "We will have this sorted. Justice will be done for the Dillard family." The crowd cheered. It was a hungry sound. Elias watched from the shadow of the hotel awning. He saw the way Crow puffed out his chest, the way the townspeople looked at him with a mix of fear and adoration. It was a trap. There would be no trial. There was a rope already measured, waiting in the storeroom. That night, the wind howled louder. Elias sat in the corner of the saloon, nursing a beer he did not drink. He heard the voices at the bar. "She is lucky she is only getting chains," one man said. "I say we drag her out tonight," another muttered. "Save the judge the trip." Elias closed his eyes. He thought about the open country. He thought about the cold rivers and the quiet of the mountains. He could leave now. He could saddle the roan and be gone before dawn. He had survived this long by minding his own business, by staying mobile, by never letting roots take hold. Stepping in meant war. It meant shooting men who wore badges. It meant becoming a hunted man again. He heard the sound of glass breaking down the street. Shouts. He walked to the door and looked out. A group of drunks was throwing stones at the side of the jailhouse, aiming for the high window. "Whore!" they screamed. "Murderer!" Elias saw a stone sail through the bars. He heard a sharp cry of pain from inside. The deputy on the porch laughed. Elias felt the change happen in his blood. It was not a sudden heat, but a cold settling. It was the realization that he could not live with the man he would be if he rode away. He looked at his hands. They were scarred, rough hands, capable of violence. He had spent years trying to keep them clean, but tonight the world was demanding dirt. He turned back into the saloon, finished his beer in one long swallow, and walked out. He went to the stable. He did not saddle his horse yet. Instead, he checked his Winchester. He checked the cinches on his gear. He checked the knife in his boot. The wind rose, screaming through the eaves of the town, drowning out the taunts of the men by the jail. Elias pulled his hat low. He would not watch an innocent woman die in chains, not under a badge that was lying. If Crow wanted a villain, Elias decided. He was about to get one. But it wouldn't be the woman in the cell. It would be the man coming to break her out. The hour before dawn was the coldest part of the night. A hollow, blue silence where the world felt brittle enough to snap. The wind had finally died down, leaving the vast emptiness of the prairie exposed. Far out in the sagebrush, a coyote yipped, a lonely, jagged sound that drifted over the sleeping town of Blackwood. Elias Boone stood in the alleyway behind the jailhouse, his breath clouding faintly in the dark. He had left his horse, a sturdy roan, tied loosely in a thicket of cottonwoods a quarter-mile south, near the creek bed. He moved with the quiet, deliberate steps of a man who had spent half his life trying not to be heard. The town felt small from here, a collection of wood and nails huddled against the indifferent miles of open country. Inside those walls, men were sleeping the sleep of the righteous, convinced they had caught a monster. Elias knew better. He adjusted the brim of his hat and checked the heavy brass key ring he had lifted from the belt of the sleeping deputy on the front porch 10 minutes ago. It had been a risk, but a calculated one. The man had been snoring, a bottle of cheap whiskey resting on his chest. Elias slipped the key into the back door of the jail. The lock was stiff, rusted by years of neglect. He turned it slowly, feeling the mechanism grind. It clicked. He pushed the door open, wincing as the hinges gave a low groan. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of old straw and unwashed men. A single lantern burned low on a desk in the corridor, casting long, jumping shadows against the cells. Clara Voss was awake. She sat on the edge of the narrow cot, her hands resting in her lap, the iron cuffs gleaming dull in the half-light. When the door opened, she did not jump. She simply looked up, her face pale and set like stone. She expected Crow. She expected the end. When she saw Elias, her eyes widened slightly, but she did not stand. "You," she whispered. Her voice was rough from thirst. "Keep your voice down," Elias said, moving quickly to the bars. He sorted through the keys, the metal clinking softly. "You are a fool," Clara said, though there was no venom in it, only a weary kind of wonder. "If they catch you, they will hang you beside me. They have to catch us first," Elias muttered. He found the smallest key and slid it into the cell lock. The tumblers turned with a heavy thud. He pulled the door open. "Let us go." Clara stood up. The chain connecting her wrists was short, forcing her to hold her hands close together. She took a step, and the chain rattled. "Wait," Elias said. He reached for her hands to unlock the cuffs, but a floorboard creaked violently in the front office. Elias froze. Clara stopped breathing. From the shadows of the front room, a figure emerged. Not the drunken deputy from the porch, but a second man, younger, holding a shotgun that looked too big for him. He had been dozing in the chair behind the door. "Hey!" the deputy shouted, fumbling to bring the barrel up. "Who is that?" There was no time for the keys, no time for words. Elias surged forward, closing the distance before the boy could level the weapon. He did not go for his gun. A shot would wake the whole town, and then they would be dead in the street. Elias grabbed the barrel of the shotgun with his left hand, shoving it upward, and drove his right fist into the deputy's jaw. The sound of the impact was sick and wet. The boy's head snapped back, and he crumbled without a sound, the shotgun clattering to the floor. Elias caught the weapon before it hit the wood, setting it down gently. He shook his hand, his knuckles throbbing. "We have to move," Elias said, his voice tight. "Now." Clara stared at the unconscious deputy, her chest heaving. She looked at Elias, her gaze measuring the violence he had just committed. It was efficient, brutal. "Come on," Elias urged, grabbing her upper arm. They went out the back door, into the biting cold of the pre-dawn. They kept to the shadows of the buildings, moving fast. Clara struggled to run with her balance thrown off by the chains. The iron cuffs bit into her wrists with every swinging motion, grinding against the bone. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. They reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrub brush and darkness. "My horse is near the creek," Elias said. Can you run?" Clara looked at the dark horizon. "I can run," she said. They scrambled down the embankment into the dry wash. The gravel shifted under their boots, loud in the silence. They ran until their lungs burned, the town lights fading behind them until they were nothing but low stars on the earth. When they reached the cottonwoods, the roan nickered softly. Elias untied the reins and mounted, pulling Clara up behind him. "Hold on to me," he said. Clara hesitated for a fraction of a second, then wrapped her chained arms around his waist. The metal pressed cold against his ribs. They rode hard for the first hour, putting miles between them and the sunrise. The sky began to lighten, turning from bruised purple to a pale, unforgiving gray. The landscape revealed itself, a vast, broken expanse of mesquite and dry earth, rising toward the distant, jagged line of the mountains. By the time the sun crested the horizon, painting the land in harsh gold, they were deep in the Badlands. Elias slowed the horse to a walk to save its strength. He steered them into a narrow canyon where the walls rose high enough to cast a shadow. "We stop here for a minute," Elias said. "I need to get those irons off you." He helped her down. Clara's legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground. She leaned against a boulder, her face gray with exhaustion. She held her hands out. The skin around her wrists was raw, blood weeping from where the metal had chewed into her flesh. Elias cursed softly under his breath. He went to his saddlebags and pulled out a small pry bar and a heavy hammer he used for fencing work. "Sit down," he said, pointing to a flat rock. Clara sat. She held her hands out on the stone, trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the cold reality of her situation. She was a fugitive. "This is going to be loud," Elias warned. He positioned the chain link against the rock. "I'm going to break the chain first, then I will work on the locks. Keep your head turned." He brought the hammer down. The sound of steel on steel rang out like a gunshot in the quiet canyon. It took 3 strikes to shatter the link. Clara flinched with every blow, her shoulders hunching, but she did not pull away. When the chain broke, her hands fell apart, though the heavy cuffs remained. Elias knelt in front of her. He took a small pick from his pocket, a tool for cleaning horse hooves that he had filed down. "Give me your left hand." He worked with a concentration that made his face look hard, but his hands were careful. He braced her wrist with his own, his fingers rough and warm against her cold skin. Clara watched him. He was not a handsome man in the traditional sense. His nose had been broken once, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sun and too little sleep. But he was solid. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias didn't look up. "Hold still. You could have ridden away." Clara said, "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Elias paused. The lock clicked, and the first cuff fell open. He massaged the red indentation on her wrist. "I know enough," he said. "I know a lie when I hear one. And I know Crow." He moved to the other hand. Clara watched his fingers. She had not been touched with this kind of intent, gentle, non-possessive in years. It unsettled her more than the violence in the jail. Men touched women in Blackwood to take something, or to steer them. Elias touched her only to free her. When the second cuff fell away, Clara brought her hands to her chest, rubbing the sore spots. Elias reached for his canteen. He poured a little water onto a clean rag and reached out. "Let me clean that," he said. "Infection will kill you slower than a rope, but it kills you just the same." Clara extended her arm as he wiped the blood away. The sleeve of her dress rode up, darker. Older scars were visible on her forearm, faint white lines that looked like they had been made by something sharp. Years ago. Elias saw them. His hand paused for a heartbeat. He did not ask. He did not look at her face to see the shame she expected. He simply wiped the skin clean, wrapped a strip of cloth around the worst of the chafing, and tied it off. "We have to keep moving," he said, standing up and capping the canteen. "Crow will have a posse out by now." He was right. Back in Blackwood, the morning was loud with accusations. Sheriff Crow stood on the steps of the jail, the bruised deputy beside him. He told the gathered crowd a story that confirmed their darkest suspicions. "She had help," Crow shouted, his face red with feigned outrage. "A drifter. Someone she likely bewitched just like she did the Dillard boy. They nearly killed Deputy Miller here. They are dangerous, and they are armed." The town ate it up. It was easier to believe in a witch and a devil than to ask why the sheriff's evidence was so convenient. 40 men signed up to ride, checking their Winchesters and saddling their fastest horses. They wanted a hunt. Elias and Clara pushed deeper into the rough country. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon into an oven. Heat radiated off the stone walls. They took turns walking to spare the horse, moving through patches of thorn and shale that tore at Clara's skirts. They reached the Whitewater River by mid-afternoon. It was running high from mountain melt, a churning gray ribbon cutting across their path. "We have to cross," Elias said, shouting over the roar of the water. "If we stay on this side, they will box us in against the bluff." He mounted the horse and pulled Clara up behind him again. The roan stepped into the current, nervous, its hooves slipping on the round river stones. The water rose to the stirrups, freezing cold, shocking after the heat of the day. Halfway across, the horse stumbled in a deep pocket. The current hit them broadside. The roan panicked, lurching sideways. Clara lost her grip. She slid backward, the icy water swallowing her instantly. The shock punched the air from her lungs. The current grabbed her, dragging her downstream, tumbling her over the rocks. "Clara!" Elias yelled. He did not hesitate. He spurred the horse, forcing it to lung downward, fighting the water. He leaned out of the saddle, extending his arm as far as he could reach. Clara surfaced, gasping, her heavy dress pulling her down like an anchor. She saw Elias, a blur of motion. She reached up, her hand breaking the surface. Elias's fingers clamped around her wrist. His grip was iron. He hauled her upward, the strain evident in the corded muscles of his neck. He dragged her toward the horse until she could grab the stirrup leather. "Get to the bank!" he roared. They scrambled onto the far shore, dripping wet, shivering violently despite the sun. Clara collapsed on the sand, coughing up water. Elias dismounted and checked the horse's legs. "You all right?" he asked, his voice sharp with adrenaline. Clara nodded, wiping wet hair from her face. She was shaking. "I am fine. We cannot stop to dry off," Elias said grimly. "That water leaves a trail. They will see where we crossed. We have to make the ridgeline before dark." He did not offer a hand to help her up this time. He just started walking, leading the horse. It was not cruelty. It was the brutal math of survival. If they stopped, they died. As they walked, Elias began to teach her. He did not lecture, and he did not speak like a hero from a dime novel. He spoke like a man who respected the land's ability to kill. "Step where I step," he said. "Watch for loose shale. Keep your mouth closed. Breathing through your nose keeps the moisture in." Clara followed him. Her skirts were heavy with water, dragging in the dirt. Her boots were soaked. Every step was a battle against gravity and exhaustion. Inside, her mind was a storm. She hated the fear that made her hands shake, but more than that, she hated the story that was being told about her. She could imagine the women in town, nodding sagely, saying, "See, she ran, only the guilty run." "They will say I did it," Clara said, her voice jagged. "Because I am running." "Let them talk," Elias said without looking back. "You are alive. Dead people do not care about their reputation. It is not just talk," Clara snapped, anger flaring hot in her chest. "It is my life. It is the only thing I had left, my name, and now it is mud." "Your name is not worth a bullet in the head," Elias said. "Keep walking." They found the line shack just as the sun began to bleed behind the western peaks. It was an abandoned structure, little more than a pile of gray timber leaning against a hillside. The roof was patched with old tar that had cracked in the heat. Elias pushed the door open. It hung on one hinge. Inside, the dust was as thick as flour. Mice scurried into the walls. There was a broken stovepipe in the corner and a smell of dry rot. "It is not a palace," Elias said, "but it will hide the fire. They brought the horse into the lean-to at the back. Elias built a small fire in the rusted stove, feeding it dry sagebrush that burned hot and fast. Night fell like a hammer. The temperature plummeted. In the high desert, the difference between noon and midnight could be 50 degrees. Clara sat by the stove, shivering in her damp clothes. Elias spread his bedroll on the floor. It was a single woolen blanket, worn thin in places. "We have to share it," he said. He did not look at her. He was busy cleaning his rifle. "If we sleep apart, we will freeze." Clara looked at the narrow blanket. She looked at Elias. He was a stranger. Really, a man who had broken her out of jail and dragged her through a river, but a stranger nonetheless. She lay down on the dusty floorboards, keeping her back to the wall. Elias lay down beside her, leaving a careful distance between them. He pulled the blanket over both of them. The heat from his body was immediate. Clara flinched when his shoulder brushed against hers. Elias froze. He shifted away, moving until he was barely under the edge of the wool. "I am not going to touch you." "Clara," he said into the dark. His voice was low and flat. "You set the rules." Clara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Thank you," she whispered. They lay in silence for a long time. The wind whistled through the gaps in the logs. Clara stared at the darkness, her eyes burning. She felt the weight of the man beside her, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Sometime in the deep hours of the night, exhaustion took her. She drifted into a restless sleep. She dreamed she was falling into the river again, the cold water closing over her head. She reached out for something to hold on to. Elias woke with a start. Clara had shifted in her sleep. Her hand was gripping the sleeve of his coat, her fingers tangled in the rough wool. She was holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in the world. He looked at her face in the faint glow of the dying embers. The tension was gone from her brow. She looked young and impossibly tired. He did not pull his arm away. He lay still, listening to the wind, terrified by the sudden fierce protective instinct that surged in his chest. He knew that feeling. It was dangerous. It made a man reckless. Morning brought the sun and the return of the tension. Clara sat up, pushing hair out of her eyes. She pulled her hand back from Elias's coat as if she had been burned. "We need to go," she said, standing up and brushing dust from her dress. Elias sat up slowly. "We need to rest your feet. You were limping yesterday." "I can walk," Clara said, her chin going up. "You will walk until you cannot. And then I will have to carry you," Elias said. "And then we both get caught. We wait until noon." "Let the horse graze. Let your boots dry." "I am not a child," Clara said. "You do not get to decide for me." "I am not deciding for you," Elias shot back, his patience thinning. "I am trying to keep us alive. There is a difference." Before Clara could answer, they heard it, the sound of hooves on rock. Not one horse, many. Elias moved instantly. He grabbed his rifle and motioned for Clara to get down. He pointed to a loose section of floorboards in the corner of the shack. "Under, now!" They scrambled to the corner. Elias pried up the boards. There was a crawl space underneath, dug out to keep the timber off the damp earth. It was dark and smelled of spiders. Clara slid in. Elias followed, pulling the boards back into place above them just as the riders pulled up outside. Dust sifted down through the cracks, settling in their hair and on their eyelashes. They lay pressed together in the dirt. Elias's arm over Clara, his hand covering her mouth gently. Heavy boots hit the porch. The door groaned open. "Empty," a voice said. It was deep and gravelly. "Looks like they were here, though," another man said. "Stove is still warm. Damn it." The first man cursed. "They are moving fast. They cannot go far." A third voice laughed. "Not with a woman dragging him down. She is probably crying for her mama by now. Or for her sheriff." The second man sneered. "You reckon she really killed him?" "Does it matter?" The first man spat. "Crow wants her back. Said he wants to teach her a lesson about respect. Said she needs to learn her place." The men laughed. It was a sound that made Clara's blood turn to ice. It was the sound of ownership, of cruelty passed off as humor. Elias felt Clara stiffen against him. He felt the tremor start in her shoulders. He tightened his hold, not to restrain her, but to ground her. He pressed his face close to her ear, a silent promise of presence. The boots walked around the shack for a few minutes more. Then came the sound of mounting horses. "Let us ride the ridge," the leader said. "Cut them off before the pass." The hooves faded into the distance. They lay in the silence for 10 minutes before Elias moved the boards. Sunlight streamed in, blindingly bright. They climbed out, covered in gray dust, looking like ghosts. Clara walked to the window and stared out, her arms wrapped around herself. "That is what they think of me," she said quietly. "Just something to be taught a lesson." She turned to Elias. Her eyes were dry, but they were haunted. After my husband died, the men in town, they changed. They stopped looking at me like a person. I was just available, unprotected. One rancher offered to pay my rent if I would be friendly. The grocer stopped giving me credit unless I smiled at him the right way. She took a shaky breath. Hunger corners you, Elias. It makes you think about trading pieces of yourself just to stay warm. Crow knew that. He waited until I was desperate, and then he offered help. But the help always had strings. It was a trap. It is always a trap. Elias leaned his rifle against the wall. He looked at his hands. "I know about traps," he said. Clara looked at him. You are free. You can go anywhere." Elias shook his head. "You carry your traps with you. 5 years ago in Kansas, I was working for a drover. He was a hard man, cheated his hands, beat his horses. One night, he went after a boy who had lost a steer, was going to whip him to death. Elias looked up, his eyes dark. I stepped in. I didn't mean to kill him, but I hit him, and he fell, and he hit his head on a wagon wheel. He didn't get up. Clara stared at him. I ran. Elias said, 'I have been running ever since.' I did the right thing, stopping him. But it does not change the fact that I killed a man. That follows you. It is a shadow you cannot outride. I'm afraid that everything I touch, I ruin. I try to help, and it turns to violence." Clara walked over to him. She reached out and touched the sleeve of his coat, the same place she had held in the night. "You did not ruin me," she said firmly. "You saved me." The distance between them suddenly felt very small. The dust motes dancing in the light seemed to stop. Elias looked at her, really looked at her, not as a victim to be saved, but as a woman who had survived the fire and come out steel. He reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder. There was a cut there, where the fabric had torn on the shale. "You are bleeding," he said softly. "It is nothing," Clara said. She did not move away. The air in the shack grew thick, charged with something that was not fear. It was the sudden, sharp realization of two lonely people recognizing each other. Elias stepped back, breaking the moment. He walked to the door, looking out at the mountains. "I am not buying you." "Clara," he said, his back to her, "I am not that rancher, and I am not Crow. I am standing beside you. That is all." Clara looked at his broad shoulders. She felt a pang in her chest, fear of owing him. Yes, but also a terrifying flicker of hope. "We cannot just run," she said. Her voice was stronger now. Elias turned. "What? If we run, the story stands." Clara said, "I will always be the woman who killed Samuel Dillard. You will always be the drifter who helped her. We will never stop looking over our shoulders." "What are you saying?" "We need proof," Clara said. "We need to show them what Crow really is." Elias looked at the mountains. The peaks were jagged and gray, capped with snow. The law was weak up there, but it was also where the truth might be hiding. "Old man Rourke," Elias said slowly. "He used to be a deputy. Quit when Crow took over. He lives up near the granite line. If anyone knows where Crow buries his secrets, it is him." "It is dangerous," Clara said. "Dying is easy," Elias said, picking up his rifle. "Living is the hard part." He held out his hand to her. Not to pull her, but to offer a choice. Clara looked at his hand. Scarred, calloused, steady. She took it. "To the mountains. Then," she said. They walked out of the shack, leaving the shelter behind. They turned their faces toward the high country, where the air was thin and the nights were cruel, but where the truth was waiting to be dug out of the rock. They were no longer just running away. They were running toward something, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them was alone. The land rose up like a fortress of gray stone and twisting pine, leaving the dust of the plains far below. The air here was thin and sharp, tasting of resin and coming snow. It was a country that did not care if a man lived or died. And for Elias Boone, that made it the only honest place left. They had been climbing for 3 days. The trail had dissolved miles ago, replaced by sliding scree and deer paths that vanished under carpets of fallen needles. Clara Voss walked with a grim determination that had replaced her earlier terror. Her boots, ill-suited for the rocks, were scuffed white at the toes, and the hem of her dress was heavy with mud. But she did not lag behind. Physically, she was hardening. The sun had browned her face, and her legs no longer trembled after a steep ascent. But Elias watched her when she thought he was not looking. He saw the way her hands shook when she tried to button her coat. He saw the way her eyes darted to the tree line at the snap of a twig, wide and white-rimmed. The exhaustion was stripping away the masks she had worn for years, the polite widow, the quiet seamstress. What was left was something raw and vibrating with tension. "We need supplies," Elias said, pulling the roan horse to a halt. The animal's sides were heaving in the thin air. "There is a mining camp over that ridge. Just a few tents and a sluice box, mostly. I can chop wood or mend tack for a few hours. Get us some flour and maybe some coffee." Clara looked at the ridge, fear tightening her mouth. "People?" "Miners," Elias said. "They do not care much for the law, but they talk. You keep your head down. Wrap that shawl tight." The camp was a scar on the side of the mountain, a cluster of canvas tents and a rough-hewn flume diverting the creek. Men with faces like leather paused in their work as Elias and Clara rode in. Their eyes were hungry, not just for women, but for anything that broke the monotony of rock and water. Elias left Clara near the edge of the camp with the horse, instructing her to stay out of sight while he negotiated for work. She stood by the animal's warmth, pulling her shawl over her hair. A woman emerged from one of the tents, carrying a basket of wet laundry. She was older, her back bent, her face etched with the hard math of survival in a camp full of men. She stopped when she saw Clara, her eyes narrowing. "You are the one," the woman said. It was not a question. Clara froze. "I do not know what you mean." The woman took a step closer, lowering her voice. "News travels up the mountain. Girl, supply mules brought the word yesterday. Sheriff Crow has a price on a woman's head. Said she killed the Dillard boy and ran off with a drifter." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "It is a lie." The woman spat on the ground. "Does not matter if it is a lie. Matters that men believe it. And men like to believe that a woman who looks like you is trouble. You bring the sheriff's wrath down on this camp, and these men will not thank you for it. They will trade you to save their own skins." Clara looked past the woman to the sluice box. 2 miners were leaning on their shovels, watching her. "I heard she lured him out there," one man said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "Said she promised him things and then cut his throat when he fell asleep." "She is a black widow," the other man agreed, spitting tobacco juice. "Those quiet ones are always the worst. Probably has that drifter wrapped around her finger too." Clara stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was happening. The lie was taking root, growing bark and leaves, becoming a solid thing. It did not matter that she had sat in a room mending shirts that night. It did not matter that she had never held a weapon in her life. The story was becoming the truth simply because it was said out loud enough times. Elias returned with a small sack of cornmeal and a tin of coffee. He took one look at Clara's face, then at the miners, and his jaw set. He did not say a word. He just took the reins, placed a hand on the small of Clara's back, and guided her away from the camp. He moved with a coiled violence, his hand resting near the knife on his belt, daring anyone to speak. No one did. They rode in silence until the camp was far behind them. "They know," Clara whispered finally. They all know. It is just noise, Elias said, though his eyes scanned the ridges above them. It is not noise, Clara insisted, her voice cracking. It is my life. Elias, they are turning me into a monster. We are going to see Rourke, Elias said, changing the subject. He lives in a ravine about 5 miles east. He was a deputy under Crow years ago. He quit in disgust. If anyone can help us, it is him. Old Man Rourke's cabin was little more than a pile of logs wedged into a fissure in the granite, hidden by a screen of aspen. As they approached, the door creaked open. A double-barreled shotgun emerged first, followed by a man who looked like he had been carved out of the mountain itself. His beard was gray and matted, and his eyes were sharp blue flint. "Hold it right there," Rourke barked. "It is me." "Rourke," Elias called out, keeping his hands high and away from his weapons. "Elias Boone. We rode the Chisholm Trail together in '78. Rourke squinted, lowering the gun an inch. "Boone? I thought you were dead in Abilene." "Not yet," Elias said, dismounting slowly. Rourke's gaze shifted to Clara. "And I suppose this is the fugitive the whole territory is buzzing about. The Black Widow of Blackwood?" Clara flinched at the name. "She is innocent." "Rourke," Elias said, his voice hard. "Everyone is innocent until the rope tightens." Rourke grunted. "I have no love for Crow, but I am not in the business of harboring killers, especially women who slice up boys." Elias opened his mouth to argue, but Clara stepped forward. She pushed the shawl back from her head. She did not cry. She did not wring her hands. She looked the old man in the eye with a terrifying calm. "He was not sliced up," Clara said clearly. "His head was crushed with a rock. If you are going to judge me, get the facts right." Rourke blinked, surprised by her tone. "Sheriff Crow came to my house for months." Clara continued. "He offered me protection. He brought me firewood. He implied that a widow alone owed him something for his attention. When I refused him, he grew angry. When the Dillard boy died, Crow saw a way to punish me and close a case at the same time. He planted the evidence. He betrayed me because I would not let him in my bed. The silence in the ravine was absolute." Rourke stared at her, searching for the lie in her face. He saw only the exhaustion and the cold, hard anger of a woman who had been pushed to the edge. He lowered the shotgun completely. "That sounds like Crow," Rourke muttered. "The man never could stand to be told no." He gestured with the barrel. "Put the horse in the lean-to. Coffee is on the stove." Inside the cabin, the air was warm and smelled of wood smoke and curing pelts. Rourke poured 3 mugs of black coffee and sat at a rough-hewn table. "Crow is not just chasing a skirt," Rourke said, looking at Elias. "He is chasing money. He always is." "What do you mean?" Elias asked. "The Dillard boy," Rourke said. "Samuel. He was a bad seed." "Sure, but he was also the heir to the river parcel, the one near the gap." "I know it," Elias said. "Good grazing." "Better than grazing," Rourke corrected. "The railroad survey came through last month. They are planning a spur line to the mines. It goes right through that parcel. Samuel Dillard was the only one standing in the way of selling it. His father wanted to sell, but the land was in the boy's name from his mother's side." Elias's eyes widened. "So with the boy dead, the father sells," Rourke said, "and Crow gets a cut for facilitating the deal and keeping the peace." Clara sat slowly, the mug warming her hands. "It was not just about me," she whispered. "It was never just about me. I was just convenient." "You were the perfect scapegoat," Rourke said not unkindly. "A woman alone, no family, a reputation for being stuck up. Crow kills 2 birds with 1 stone. He gets his payout from the land deal, and he gets to destroy the woman who bruised his ego." A darker realization washed over Clara. She remembered the nights Crow had knocked on her door, the soft menace in his voice. "He threatened me," she said, her voice trembling. "Weeks ago. He said if I did not let him help me, I might find myself in trouble with the law. He was planning this. He has been planning to frame me for something, anything, for months. I have been living on a cliff edge and I did not even know it." The Dillard boy might not have been innocent either, Rourke added. I heard Samuel was bragging about a big payday coming. Maybe he was in on it with Crow, trying to squeeze his own father. And things went south. Or maybe he came to you that night to warn you. Clara shook her head, confusion clouding her eyes. I never saw him that night. But there was a knock. Late. I didn't answer it. I thought it was Crow. If it was the boy trying to help you, and Crow killed him. Elias let the sentence hang. The uncertainty was a heavy weight in the room. We need proof, Elias said, slamming his hand on the table. We cannot fight a land grab and a murder charge with stories. We need paper. Crow is sloppy, Rourke said. He is arrogant. He keeps records. He has a ledger. I saw it when I worked for him. He writes down every bribe, every favor. He calls it his insurance policy. Where does he keep it? Clara asked. In the office, Rourke said. Under the floorboards beneath the safe. Or at least, that is where it used to be. We have to go back, Elias said. Clara looked at him. Back to Blackwood? It is the only way, Elias said. If we run, you are a fugitive forever. If we get that ledger, we can hang Crow with his own rope. I will not hide forever, Clara said, her voice finding its steel again. I am done being a ghost. Before they could formulate a plan, the mountain turned on them. The sky, which had been gray all afternoon, suddenly turned a bruised purple. The wind began to scream, stripping the needles from the pines outside. Storm, Rourke grunted, standing up to bar the door. A bad one. You two are not going anywhere for a few days. The snow came within the hour, heavy and wet, burying the ravine in white silence. The cabin became a small, dark world. Rourke spent most of the time in the loft or tending to his traps in the shed, leaving Elias and Clara alone in the main room. The confinement stripped away the last of their defenses. The sound of the wind was relentless, a reminder of how small they were against the world. On the second night, the fire was dying down. Clara sat on a rug near the hearth, staring into the embers. Elias sat on a stool nearby, whittling a piece of pine, the shavings curling onto the floor. You asked me once why I smiled at men I hated, Clara said quietly. She did not look at him. Elias stopped whittling. I never asked that. You thought it, though. She said, I saw it in your eyes in town. You wondered why I was polite to Crow in the street. Elias didn't answer. It is how you stay alive, Clara said. When my husband died, I realized that a woman without a man is just open territory. If you frown, they call you bitter. If you ignore them, they call you proud. If you fight back, they call you crazy. So you smile. You make yourself small. You pretend their jokes are funny so they do not get angry. She pulled her knees to her chest. I slept with a chair wedged under the door handle every night for 2 years. Every time the wind rattled the latch, I thought it was someone coming to collect on the debt of me being alone. Elias looked at her, his heart aching in a way he was not used to. He set the knife and the wood down. I do not think you are small. He said, I feel small, Clara whispered. I feel like I've been disappearing, piece by piece, until there is nothing left but the fear. Elias leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I know that feeling, but it is not fear for me. It is emptiness. He looked at his hands. I told you I killed a man, but I did not tell you why I drift. It is not just the law. It is that I am afraid to stop. When you stop, you have to care about things. You have to care about people. And when I care, I get reckless. I stop thinking. I just act. And people get hurt when I act. You are acting now, Clara said. You are helping me. And I am terrified, Elias confessed, his voice low and rough. I am terrified that I am going to get you killed because I cannot walk away. The confession hung in the air, raw and honest. The romantic tension that had been simmering between them since the river crossing suddenly boiled over. It was not the sweet tension of a courtship. It was the desperate, magnetic pull of two people huddling against the dark. A sudden gust of wind slammed against the cabin, shaking the timbers. Clara gasped, her hands flying to her face, her breath coming in short, panicked hitches. The memories of the jail, the mob, the river, it all crashed down on her at once. Elias was off the stool in a second. He knelt before her. He did not grab her. He reached out and cupped her face in his large, warm hands. "Clara," he said firmly, "look at me. You are here. You are safe." Clara looked at him. His thumbs stroked her cheekbones. Rough skin against soft. His eyes were steady, an anchor in the storm. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. It was the first safe thing she had felt in years. It was not a demand. It was a shelter. When she opened her eyes, he was close. So close she could feel the warmth of his breath. The desire that flared in her was not about gratitude. It was about needing to feel alive. She was tired of death, tired of fear. She wanted to know that her heart could still beat for something other than running. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a tentative, shy kiss. It was brief, intense, and trembling with need. Her lips pressed against his, asking a question, demanding an answer. For a moment, Elias froze. Then, with a low sound in his throat, he kissed her back. His hands slid into her hair. The firelight flickered, casting their shadows long against the wall. Then, Elias pulled back. He did not push her away. He simply stopped, his forehead resting against hers, his breathing ragged. "Elias?" Clara whispered, hurt flickering in her eyes. Elias kept his eyes closed for a second, fighting the urge to pull her back into him. "No," he rasped. "Not like this." He pulled his hands away gently and sat back on his heels. "You are scared. Clara, you are exhausted. If we do this tonight, tomorrow you might wake up and feel like you just traded one kind of comfort for another. Like you paid me with your body because I helped you." Clara stared at him, stunned. "I chose this," she said fiercely. "I know," Elias said. "But I will not be another man who takes something from you just because you are vulnerable. I want you to be sure. I want you to be safe. And right now," he gestured to the storm outside, "we are still in the trap." Clara looked at him, her chest heaving. She hated him in that moment. She hated him for being so noble, for being so gentle. It would have been easier if he had just taken what was offered. But his refusal, his protection of her dignity, even against her own desire, made her want him with an ache that was almost physical. She wrapped her arms around herself, turning back to the fire. "You are a hard man to figure. Elias Boone, I am a simple man," Elias said quietly. "I just want to be able to look you in the eye when this is over." The storm broke the next morning. The sun came out, blindingly bright on the new snow. Rourke came down from the loft, checking his rifle. "Snow will melt fast on the lower slopes," Rourke said, "but it will slow down the horses. That buys you time, or it traps you." He looked at the two of them, sensing the shifted air in the room, but he said nothing. "I went out to check the perimeter," Rourke said. "Saw a rider on the ridge, not a deputy, a hired gun. Crow has opened the purse strings. He is bringing in bounty hunters." "Then we have to move tonight," Elias said, "before they close the net." Clara stood up, smoothing her dress. She looked different today. The fear was still there, but it was controlled. She looked at Elias, and there was a new understanding between them. "To town," she said. "They left the cabin at dusk. Rourke gave them fresh ammunition and a sack of dried venison. If you get caught," Rourke said, shaking Elias's hand, "do not tell them where you got the jerky. I will tell them I stole it." Elias said with a half smile, "Watch your back. Boone, and you, miss, give them hell." They rode down the mountain in the blue twilight. The air grew heavier as they descended, the scent of pine giving way to the smell of dust and sage. The cold was sharp, biting through their coats. They did not speak much. They moved through the shadows of the foothills, avoiding the main trails. The silence of the stars was vast and indifferent. By midnight, they reached the overlook above Blackwood. The town lay below them, a grid of yellow lamps in the darkness. From this distance, it looked peaceful, but they knew better. It was a nest of predators. They could hear the faint sound of a piano from the saloon, tinny and distorted by the distance. Laughter drifted up on the wind, drunken, careless laughter. Elias pulled the horse to a stop. He turned in the saddle to look at Clara. "Last chance to turn back," he said. "We can ride north. Keep going until we hit Canada." Clara looked at the lights of the town. She saw her old house. She saw the jail. She saw the place where her life had been stolen. "No," she said softly. "I am not running anymore." She nudged her heels into the horse's flank. "Let us go," she said. Elias smiled, a grim, dangerous expression in the dark. He turned the horse's head toward the lights. Together, they rode down the slope, walking straight back into the mouth of the beast, not as prisoners, but as hunters. Blackwood at night was a different beast than the dusty, sun-bleached skeleton it appeared to be at noon. In the dark, the town breathed. It smelled of things spilled and things hidden, rye whiskey soaking into sawdust, the acrid bite of coal smoke, and the heavy, earthy stench of the stockyards that hung low in the valley. Elias and Clara moved through the labyrinth of back alleys like shadows detached from their owners. The mud here was half frozen, crunching softly under their boots. But the wind was loud enough to mask the sound. Elias took the lead, his body a tense line of muscle, moving with the predator grace he had learned in the high country. Clara followed, her hand pressed against the rough wood of fence lines to steady herself. They paused behind the water trough at the rear of the general store. Through a gap in the buildings, Clara could see her old home. It sat small and square against the dark, the roof line familiar enough to make her chest ache, but the windows, usually dark by this hour when she lived there alone, were glowing with warm, yellow lamplight. A silhouette moved past the curtain, a woman, heavy-set, laughing at something unseen. A man's shadow joined her. Clara felt a physical blow to her stomach. It had been less than a week, and she was already gone. Her sewing table, her neatly folded linens, the silence she had cultivated like a garden, all of it had been swept out. Strangers were living in her rooms, warming themselves by her stove. It was as if she had never existed at all, as if Clara Voss was just a rumor that had blown through town and vanished. "Don't look," Elias whispered. His voice was a vibration against the night air, close to her ear. "I am a ghost," Clara said, her voice hollow. "They have already buried me." Elias turned, gripping her shoulder. His fingers were hard, grounding her. "You are not a ghost. You are standing right here, and we are going to make sure they know it." He pulled her away from the sight, guiding her toward the brick structure of the jailhouse. The sheriff's office was dark, save for a single lantern left burning low in the front window, a signal that the law was watching even when it slept. But Elias knew Crow's habits. The sheriff would be at the saloon or playing cards at the hotel, soaking up the adoration of the frightened townsfolk. They approached the back door, the same one they had fled through days ago. The lock had been repaired, the wood reinforced with a fresh iron strap. Elias cursed silently. He pulled a thin metal shim from his pocket, kneeling in the dirt. "Watch the street," he murmured. Clara turned her back to him, her eyes scanning the alley. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that made her hands shake. Every sound was a threat. A dog barking 2 streets over sounded like a signal. The crunch of gravel sounded like Crow's heavy boots. She remembered those boots pausing outside her door, the terrifying silence before his knock. She remembered the way he breathed when he looked at her, as if he were deciding which part of her to break first. "Got it," Elias breathed. The door swung open with a reluctant groan. They slipped inside, and the smell hit Clara instantly. Stale tobacco, gun oil, and the sour reek of unwashed men. It was the smell of her captivity. She hesitated on the threshold, nausea rising in her throat. Elias pulled her in and shut the door. "We have to be quick. Rourke said the floorboard's under the safe." He moved to the heavy iron safe in the corner of the office. It was a formidable box, but they didn't need to get inside it. Elias shoved the heavy oak desk aside, the legs scraping across the floor. He knelt, tapping the handle of his knife against the wood planks. hollow. He jammed the blade into the gap between the boards and pried. The wood groaned, a nail shrieking as it gave way. Clara watched the window, her breath held in her chest. Elias lifted the board. He reached into the dark space beneath the foundation. His hand swept around, searching. For a terrible second, Clara thought Rourke was wrong, or that Crow had moved it. Then Elias grunted and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book and a bundle of envelopes tied with twine. "The ledger," Elias said. He moved to the desk, tilting the cover toward the dim light filtering in from the street. He flipped the pages, his eyes scanning the columns of neat, cramped handwriting. "Look at this," he whispered. Clara moved to his side. The pages were a catalog of corruption. They were payments from the railroad company, marked as consulting fees. There were payouts to the judge, and there were names of local ranchers, with sums listed next to them under a column titled Acquisition. Elias turned the page to the current month. Clara saw it instantly. Dillard, River Parcel, payment pending acquisition. And below that, in ink that looked fresh, Voss, leverage, no cost. Clara stared at her name. No cost. She was not even a person to Harlan Crow. She was a zero, a tool to be used and discarded to secure a piece of land. The humiliation was hotter than the fear. He had destroyed her life, stained her reputation, and hunted her like an animal. All for a line in a book. "Take it," Elias said, shoving the book into his coat pocket. He grabbed the bundle of letters. "We have enough to hang him." A heavy latch clicked at the front of the building. Elias and Clara froze. Footsteps sounded on the boardwalk, heavy and stumbling. Keys jingled. The coat closet. Elias hissed. He grabbed Clara's arm and dragged her into the narrow alcove where the deputies hung their heavy winter dusters and rain slicks. They stepped back into the shadows, pressing themselves against the wall. Elias pulled the thick wool coats across the opening just as the front door swung open. Light flooded the main room as a deputy lit the overhead lamp. It was Miller, the man Elias had knocked out during the escape. His jaw was still bruised purple. "Who moved the damn desk?" Miller muttered, his voice thick with drink. Clara stood pressed against Elias's chest. The closet was tiny, the air stiflingly hot and smelling of wet wool and sweat. There was no room to move. Her back was against the rough plaster of the wall, and Elias was a solid wall of muscle against her front. She could feel his heart beating against her own. A steady, heavy thud. Her breath hitched, coming in shallow gasps. The darkness, the confinement, the smell of the lawmen's coats, it all conspired to send her mind spinning back to the cell. She felt the phantom weight of chains on her wrists. The walls seemed to be closing in, crushing her. She started to tremble, a violent shaking she could not control. A small, panicked sound rose in her throat. Elias felt her unraveling. He knew that sound. It was the sound of a trapped animal about to bolt. If she screamed, if she ran, they were dead. He moved his hand, sliding it up her arm to cup the back of her neck. His thumb pressed against the pulse point under her ear. He leaned down, his mouth right against her temple. "Clara," he breathed, so quiet it was more thought than sound. "I have you. Look at me." He did not use force. He used presence. He boxed her in, not to trap her, but to shield her. Clara looked up into the darkness, finding the glint of his eyes. His body was hard against hers, his leg pressed between her knees to make room. The contact was electric. It cut through the panic, replacing the fear of the deputy with a sudden, overwhelming awareness of the man holding her. Her breath ghosted against the hollow of his throat. She could smell him, pine pitch, cold air, and the underlying scent of a man who had been riding hard. It was not the smell of the law. It was the smell of the wild. The desire hit her with the force of a physical blow, tangled inextricably with the adrenaline. She wanted to bury her face in his coat. She wanted to feel his hands on her, erasing the memory of the chains. Elias held her gaze in the dark, his hand steady on her neck. He felt the shift in her, the way the trembling turned into a different kind of tension. He felt the heat of her body seeping into his. He wanted to kiss her. The urge was so strong it made his hands ache. He wanted to claim this moment, to prove that they were alive in the midst of death. But Miller was right there. The deputy kicked the desk leg. "Damn rats," he grumbled. He walked toward the closet. Elias's hand moved to the knife at his belt. He tensed, ready to spring. Clara held her breath, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands clutching the lapels of Elias's coat. Miller stopped a foot away. He sighed, a long, rattling sound, and turned back. He blew out the lamp. "Not my shift," he muttered. The door opened and closed. The lock clicked. They stood in the dark for a long minute, neither of them moving. The silence in the closet was heavy, charged with everything that had almost happened and everything that still might. Elias let out a long breath. He stepped back, giving her space, though the loss of his warmth made Clara shiver. "We go," he whispered. "Now." They slipped out of the closet and back into the alley. They moved fast, the adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. They made it to the edge of town, where the horses were hidden, and mounted up. But in the rush, in the chaotic tumble from the closet, something had snagged. Clara did not notice that the small, embroidered handkerchief she had tucked into her sleeve, the one her mother had sent her from Boston, with her initials stitched in blue, was gone. It lay on the floor of the evidence room, a splash of white against the dark wood, right where the coats had been pushed aside. They rode hard for the foothills, intending to circle back to Rourke's cabin before heading to the railhead in the next county. They rode until the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red. But Crow was not sleeping. When the morning shift came on, the moved desk was discovered, then the loose floorboard, then the missing ledger. Crow tore the office apart in a fury that terrified his own men. When he found the handkerchief on the closet floor, he did not shout. He went very still. He rubbed the fine linen between his thumb and forefinger. "She was here," he said softly, "and she thinks she is clever." He walked out onto the street. "Gather the men," he ordered, "all of them, and bring me the ones who talked to her. The old man in the mountains, the washerwoman, anyone who has ever given her a kind word. We are not just hunting a fugitive anymore," Crow said, his voice carrying down the street. "We are cutting out a cancer." By noon, the posse had doubled in size. By 2 o'clock, they had found the trail leading up toward the granite peaks. Elias and Clara were miles away, navigating a shale ridge. When the sound of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, it was distant, a series of sharp cracks like dry wood snapping. "That came from the east," Elias said, pulling the horse up. "From the ravine, Rourke!" Clara gasped. They turned the horse, pushing the tired animal back the way they had come, skirting the lower trails to stay hidden. It took them 2 hours to reach a vantage point overlooking the fissure where Rourke's cabin stood. Smoke was rising in a black pillar against the blue sky. The cabin was gone. It was a smoldering ruin of collapsed logs. There were tracks everywhere, horseshoes, boot prints. Elias dismounted and crept down the slope, Clara following close behind. The silence was terrible. There were no birds singing. They found Rourke near the woodpile. He was lying on his back, his shotgun empty beside him. He had not gone down easy. There was blood on the ground that wasn't his, but there was a hole in his chest that marked the end of the old lawman's watch. Clara made a sound that was not quite a scream, a strangled cry of grief that she smothered with both hands. She fell to her knees in the dirt. "No," she sobbed. "No, please." Elias stood over his friend, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes were burning. He saw the sign pinned to Rourke's shirt with a knife. A scrap of paper with hasty writing. For aiding a murderess, it was not just a killing, it was a message. Clara stared at the sign. She read the words, and something inside her broke. "I did this," she whispered. Her voice was trembling, rising in pitch. "I brought this here. He is dead because of me." "Crow did this," Elias said, his voice grinding like gravel. "No!" Clara screamed. Standing up, she backed away from him, her eyes wild. It is me. Everyone who stands beside me dies. My husband. Now Rourke. You are next. Elias. Do you not see it? I am poison." She spun around and ran toward the horse. She grabbed the reins, trying to mount, her movements frantic and clumsy. "Clara, stop!" Elias shouted. "I have to leave," she cried, fighting him as he grabbed the bridle. "I have to draw them away. I will surrender. I will tell them I did it all. I will tell them I forced Rourke. I forced you. You will do no such thing," Elias roared. He grabbed her by the waist and hauled her back from the horse. She fought him, striking at his chest with her fists, kicking at his shins. "Let me go," she screamed, the tears finally flowing, hot and blinding. "Let me go so you can live. I am not letting you die for a lie," Elias shouted back. He pinned her arms to her sides, holding her tight against him until her struggles turned into racking sobs. She collapsed against him, all the fight draining out of her, leaving only the hollow ache of grief. Elias lowered them both to the ground in the shelter of a rock overhang, away from the smoke of the burning cabin. Clara curled into a ball, her forehead pressed against the dirt. She cried silently now, her fists jammed into her mouth as if she were ashamed of the sound of her own pain. Her body shook with the force of it. Elias sat beside her. He felt a heavy, sickening weight in his own gut. He had led them here. He had thought Rourke could handle himself. He had underestimated Crow's cruelty. He had brought death to an old friend's door in the name of doing right. He reached out and pulled Clara into his lap. She did not resist. She buried her face in his neck, soaking his collar with tears. He held her, not like a conqueror, and not like a savior. He held her like a man who was just as broken as she was. He stroked her hair, his hand trembling slightly. "I am sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I am so sorry." "Clara," they stayed like that until the sun went down and the cold began to creep into their bones. The fire in the cabin died down to glowing coals. Clara finally pulled back. Her face was swollen, her eyes red, but the hysteria was gone. In its place was a raw, open wound. "They hate me," she whispered. "The whole town. They hate me so much they would kill an old man just to hurt me." "It is not hate," Elias said gently. "It is fear, and it is power. Crow is using you to terrify them." "I believed them," Clara confessed. Her voice was so quiet, Elias had to lean in to hear. "When they called me names, when they said I was proud, I started to believe that maybe I deserved it. Maybe I was wrong for wanting to be alone. Maybe I was dirty for surviving. I spent years thinking that if I just made myself smaller, I could be clean again." Elias looked at her in the moonlight. He saw the dirt on her cheek, the tear tracks, the fierce set of her jaw. "You are not dirty," he said. "You are the cleanest thing in this whole damn territory." He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. His grip was firm. "I have spent my life running because I was afraid of this," he said. "I was afraid of wanting someone so much that I would burn the world down for them. I thought it made me weak." He looked at the ruin of Rourke's cabin. "But seeing this, seeing what they did, it does not make me want to run. It makes me want to stand." He turned his gaze back to her. "I want you, Clara. And that terrifies me more than Crow's posse, because it is real, and because I cannot walk away from it." Clara looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, mirroring her own. She saw the man who had pulled her from the river, the man who had held her in the closet, the man who had refused to touch her until she was ready. She realized then that she was done letting the town decide who she was. She was done letting Crow decide what she was worth. She was done feeling ashamed of her body and her heart. She reached up and touched his face. "I do not want to be saved tonight. Elias," she said steadily, "I want to be held. I want to know that I am still here, that I am mine, and I want to share that with you." She leaned in and kissed him. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and smoke, of grief and desperation. Elias made a low sound and pulled her closer. This time, he did not pull away. Their loving was not soft. It was fierce and urgent, a desperate reclaiming of life in the face of death. It was hands exploring boundaries and finding them welcome. It was skin against skin, warmth against cold. It was Clara guiding his hands, choosing every touch, erasing the memory of the chains and the cage. For the first time in her life, she was not submitting. She was not trading. She was taking. She was giving. And in the dark of the ravine, with the smell of smoke still in the air, they built a small, defiant fire between them that had nothing to do with wood or coal. When the dawn came, the world was still brutal. The wind bit at their exposed skin. Their stomachs rumbled with hunger. The smoke from Rourke's cabin had stopped rising, leaving only a black scar on the land. They were still hunted. They were still outnumbered. But as Clara stood up and brushed the dirt from her dress, the slump was gone from her shoulders. She braided her hair back with steady hands. She looked at the ledger, which lay protected in Elias's saddlebag. She looked at Elias, who was checking the cinch on the roan. He caught her eye and stopped. There was no shame in his look, only a deep, steady recognition. "We are not going to hide in the mountains," Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but it had a new edge. It was the voice of a woman who had walked through the fire and decided she liked the heat. "No," Elias agreed. We are going to find the circuit judge," she said. "He is due in Silver Creek in 2 days." Elias said, "It is a hard ride across the flats. Open ground. Let them come." Clara said. She walked over to him. She did not ask for permission. She reached up and took the rifle from the scabbard, checking the action with a competence she had learned in the last 3 days. "We are going to bring the law down on Harlan Crow," she said. "And if the law will not do it, we will." Elias watched her. He saw the grief still lingering in the corners of her eyes, but he saw the steel underneath. He nodded once. He mounted the horse and pulled her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his back. This time, she did not hold on out of fear. She held on because she belonged there. They rode out of the ravine, leaving the mountains behind. They headed down toward the flat, bleak stretch of prairie that lay between them and Silver Creek. The sky above was the color of a fresh bruise, promising more storms. They carried a stolen ledger. They carried the weight of a dead friend. They carried a love that had teeth, sharp enough to tear through the lies of a town that had tried to break them. They rode into the open, and they did not look back. The country flattened out into a vast, unforgiving skillet of hard-pan clay and dry grass. Here, the wind did not howl through trees. It screamed across open miles with nothing to break its teeth on but the skin of travelers. It carried grit that sandblasted the face and settled deep in the lungs. The sun was a white hammer by day, and the nights were so clear the stars looked sharp enough to cut glass. Elias and Clara rode the roan horse into the ground, trading walking for riding in 2-hour shifts to spare the animal. They spoke little. The wind took the words away before they could reach each other's ears. And, besides, there was nothing left to say that wasn't already in the set of their jaws. They were two fugitives moving toward a reckoning. Silver Creek was not a town so much as a scar on the prairie where the railroad had decided to pause. It was a collection of raw lumber shacks, canvas tents, and a depot that smelled of creosote and coal smoke. It sat on the edge of the territory, a place where the law was thin and the telegraph wire was the only tether to civilization. They arrived at midday, dust coating them like gray flour. Clara's face was unrecognizable, her lips cracked from the dry air, her eyes shadowed. Elias looked like a man carved from driftwood, lean and weathered. They tied the exhausted horse to the rail outside the depot. The telegraph office was a small cage of a room attached to the station. The operator, a man with ink-stained fingers and a nervous tic in his left eye, looked up as they entered. He saw the dust. He saw the pistol on Elias's hip. And then he looked at Clara. He knew. The wanted posters had not reached this far yet, but the wire moved faster than paper. "I need to send a message to the United States Marshal in Denver," Elias said, his voice rasping like a file on iron, "and one to Judge Wilkes on the circuit." The operator hesitated. His hand hovered over the key. The machine clicked rhythmically in the background, a heartbeat of Morse code tapping out news from the east. "System is down," the operator lied. His eyes darted to the door. "Send it," Elias said, leaning on the counter. The operator swallowed hard. Look, mister, I do not want any trouble. Sheriff Crow sent a wire an hour ago. Said to keep an eye out for a rustler and a woman. Said they are dangerous. Said the woman is a killer. Clara stepped forward. She did not shrink back as she might have a week ago. She placed her hands on the counter. They were bruised, scratched, and dirty, but they were steady. Look at me, she said. The operator flicked his gaze to her, then away, as if looking at her would contaminate him. I said, look at me, Clara commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the hum of the room. The man looked. My name is Clara Voss. I am a seamstress. I mend shirts. I bake bread. I buried my husband 2 years ago. I am not a rumor. I am not a monster in a story someone told you. I am a woman standing in front of you, asking for the law to do its job. The operator blinked. He saw the exhaustion in her face. He saw the human terrified dignity that no wanted poster could capture. Please, Clara said softly, just send the message. Tell the judge we have the ledger. Tell him we are coming in. The door behind them opened. The sunlight was blocked out by the silhouette of a man. You will be doing no such thing, a voice boomed. It was not Crow. It was a deputy, flanked by 2 men wearing long dusters. But behind them, stepping out of a carriage that must have arrived on the morning stage, was Harlan Crow. He looked fresh, clean-shaven, and terrifyingly civilized against the backdrop of the dusty settlement. He had ridden hard, changing horses at every station, using the rail lines where he could. He was a man who did not let his property escape. There she is, Crow said, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The Black Widow and her pet wolf. Men began to gather outside. The rail workers, the saloon patrons, the women who were shopping at the mercantile. They stared at Clara with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. The story had arrived before her. To them, she was not a person. She was a scandal. She was the woman who killed a boy and ran off with a drifter. Take them, Crow ordered. Elias's hand dropped to his gun. His thumb broke the leather thong on the hammer. The air in the room turned brittle. Don't, Clara said sharp and low. Elias looked at her. He could drop the deputy. He could maybe even get Crow, but he would die doing it. And Clara would be left alone with the wolves. We do not fight them with bullets, Clara said, her eyes fixed on Crow. We fight them with the truth. She turned to the crowd that was pressing in at the door. I demand a hearing, she shouted. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through it. Judge Wilkes is in town. I saw his carriage at the hotel. I demand he hear me before you put chains on me again. Crow laughed. It was a rich, confident sound. The judge is tired. Clara, he does not have time for fairy tales from a murderess. I have the ledger, Clara screamed. The laughter stopped. Crow's face went still. The crowd shifted. The word ledger carried weight. Everyone in the territory knew that men like Crow kept books. A man stepped out of the crowd. He was older, wearing a black frock coat that had seen better days, carrying a medical bag. Dr. Thorne. He had treated Clara's husband after the accident that killed him. He was a man who had seen the way the town turned its back on the young widow. Let the woman speak, Doctor, Thorne said. His voice was gravelly and authoritative. She is a fugitive. Crow snapped. She is a citizen, Thorne countered. And if she has evidence, the law says she gets to show it. Or has the law changed since you pinned on that badge? Harlan? Crow looked at the doctor, then at the crowd. He saw the uncertainty. He could shoot them down, but there were too many witnesses now. He needed to win this the way he always won, by twisting the truth until it strangled his enemies. Fine, Crow said, slicking back his hair. Bring the judge. Let us have a show. The hearing was held in the freight hall of the depot. It smelled of sawdust and raw pine. There were no benches, so the townsfolk stood, pressing in tight, a wall of judging eyes. Judge Wilkes sat at a table on a raised platform, looking pale and smelling of gin. He was a man who preferred easy verdicts and comfortable dinners, and he looked unhappy to be there. Clara stood in the center of the room. Elias stood just behind her, his body angled to shield her from the crowd, his hand never leaving the vicinity of his belt. Crow paced the floor like a lawyer. He painted a picture of Clara that was grotesque in its detail. He called her a seductress. He claimed she had lured Samuel Dillard to the riverbank with promises of affection, then robbed him and bashed his head in when he resisted. He claimed Elias was a known rustler who had been paid with stolen gold to break her out. He played the crowd like a fiddle. He used their prejudice as ammunition. "Look at her," Crow said, gesturing to Clara's torn dress, her dust-streaked face. "Is this a respectable woman, or is this a woman who has rejected every decency this society offers? She runs with outlaws. She sleeps in the dirt. She bites the hand of the law that tried to protect her." The crowd murmured. Women turned their faces away, pulling their children closer. Men glared, seeing in Clara every woman who had ever rejected them. Clara felt the shame rising, hot and suffocating. It would be so easy to crumble, to let the tears come, to beg. But then she felt Elias's presence at her back. He did not speak. He did not interrupt. He simply stood there, a solid wall against the world. He was letting her own this. Clara straightened her spine. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the bundle of letters they had taken from the safe. Elias produced the ledger from his coat. "I did not kill Samuel Dillard," Clara said. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. "But I know why he died." She opened the ledger. She read the entry aloud. The date, the amount, the name Dillard, and her own name. No cost. "Sheriff Crow came to my home," Clara said, looking directly at the women in the front row. "He told me he wanted to help me. He told me a widow needed a man's protection. But when I said no, when I told him I would not trade my body for his favor, he got angry." She took a breath. The silence in the hall was absolute. "He told me I was ungrateful. He told me I was dangerous. He started watching my house. And when the railroad deal came up, and he needed the Dillard land, he saw a way to get rid of the boy and punish me at the same time." She looked at the judge. "I have been humiliated," she said. "I have been dragged through the street in chains. I have had my home taken, my letters read, my name turned into a curse. And for what? Because I would not bow, because I wanted to live my own life." She pointed a trembling finger at Crow. "He does not protect the law. He sells it. And he killed Samuel Dillard to close a deal." Crow's face was purple. "That is a forgery," he shouted. "That book is stolen property." "Doctor," Thorne stepped forward. "I treated Mrs. Voss for bruises on her arm 3 weeks ago," he said clearly. "Finger marks, large ones. She told me she fell, but they looked like a man's grip to me. A man trying to force someone." The crowd wavered. The ledger was damning. The testimony was powerful. But Crow was power incarnate. He had money. He had guns. Judge Wilkes looked at the ledger, then at Crow. He looked at the angry men in the back of the room who were on Crow's payroll. He wiped sweat from his upper lip. "This evidence is circumstantial," Wilkes stammered. "The book could be anything. And the woman is a fugitive who broke jail. That is a fact." Elias stepped forward then. "And what about the deputy who tried to kill us in the mountains? What about the old man, Rourke, who was murdered in his own yard yesterday?" The judge flinched. "Murder?" Crow stepped in, smooth as oil. "Rourke was resisting arrest. He drew on my deputies. It was tragic, but necessary." The judge looked at the papers. He looked at Crow's hard eyes. He was a weak man, and weak men choose safety. I cannot make a ruling on this here," Wilkes said. "The accused must be remanded to custody until a proper trial can be held in the district court. In the meantime, the sheriff will retain control of the prisoner." It was a death sentence. Everyone knew it. If Clara went back into Crow's custody, she would never make it to the district court. She would be shot escaping before the sun went down. Crow smiled. He walked toward Clara, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Come along." "Clara," he said softly, "I told you I would keep you safe." He reached for her. "Wait," Crow said, his voice dropping so only she could hear. He leaned in close, under the guise of taking her arm. "I can make this go away," he whispered. "The ledger disappears. The charges drop. You sign a deed quitting your claim to any property in the county, and you get on the next train east. You disappear. Clara, you never come back, and maybe your cowboy friend gets to ride away too. Clara looked at him. She looked at the exit. She looked at Elias. She could save him. She could end this terror right now by erasing herself. No, Clara said. Crow blinked. What? I will not disappear, she said loud enough for the room to hear. And I will not sign your lies. Crow's face twisted into a snarl. Then you rot! He grabbed her arm violently. That was the spark. Elias moved. He did not go for his gun. There were too many people. He drove his shoulder into Crow's chest, knocking the sheriff back. Get your hands off her, Elias roared. The room erupted. Crow's hired men surged forward. The rail workers, sensing the injustice, pushed back. It became a brawl of boots and fists. Get her out! Doctor! Thorne shouted, throwing a chair in front of a deputy. Elias grabbed Clara's hand. The back door! They fought their way through the press of bodies. A deputy lunged at them, swinging a heavy pistol like a club. Elias blocked the blow with his forearm and struck the man hard in the gut. They burst out the back door into the blinding afternoon sun. But Crow was fast. He came out the side door, a long-barreled Colt in his hand. Stop! Crow screamed. He fired. The sound was deafening. Elias jerked violently, stumbling sideways. He grunted, a sharp, surprised sound. Elias, Clara screamed. He didn't fall. He grabbed his side, his fingers instantly wet with red. He shoved Clara toward the horses. Go! He shouted, raising his own pistol to fire a warning shot into the dirt at Crow's feet. They scrambled into the saddles. The roan horse reared, panicked by the gunfire. Elias swayed, his face going gray, but he hauled himself up. They spurred the horses, tearing away from the depot just as the rest of the posse spilled out into the street. Bullets kicked up dust around the hooves. But they were moving fast, desperate speed fueled by terror. They did not go far. They couldn't. Elias was losing blood. They ducked into an abandoned barn at the edge of the settlement. Half a mile out, Elias slid from the saddle and collapsed into the straw. Clara was beside him in an instant. She tore the hem of her petticoat, her hands shaking so hard she could barely rip the fabric. Let me see, she commanded, her voice high and tight. Elias groaned as she pulled his coat open. The bullet had grazed his ribs, carving a deep, ugly furrow along his side. It wasn't deep enough to hit a lung, but it was bleeding freely, soaking his shirt and the waistband of his trousers. It is okay, Elias gasped. His teeth gritted against the pain. Just a scratch. It is not a scratch, Clara cried. She pressed the cloth against the wound. She looked at the blood on her hands. His blood. The terror that washed over her was different than the fear of the law. It was the fear of loss. She realized in that moment that love was not soft words or shared sunsets. Love was this, kneeling in the dirt, hands slick with blood, choosing to stay when every instinct screamed to run. You foolish man. She wept, pressing down hard. You stepped in front of him. I told you, Elias wheezed, reaching up to touch her face with a bloody hand. I am terrified of what happens to you. Clara leaned down, resting her forehead against his. I am here. I have you. The bleeding slowed as she bound the wound tight. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving them in the quiet, dusty silence of the barn. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the roof, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Elias lay back, exhausted. Clara sat beside him, stroking his hair. The intimacy of the moment was profound. It was quieter than the passion in the mountains. It was an aching, heavy thing. Clara leaned down and kissed him. It was a promise. It tasted of salt and iron. It was a kiss that acknowledged that tomorrow might not come. But today they were together. We cannot run any more, Elias said after a long time. His voice was weak, but steady. If we run, he wins. He will hunt us until one of us is dead. I know, Clara said. We have to go back, Elias said. Back to Blackwood. Clara looked at the ledger, still tucked in his pocket. We take the judge, she said. Elias looked at her. What? Wilkes is weak, Clara said, but he is scared. He saw the crowd today. He saw the doubt. If we go back, if we ride into Blackwood in the light of day, and we drag the judge with us. Crow cannot kill us in the street without starting a war. It is suicide, Elias said. It is justice. Clara replied. She looked at his wound. Can you ride? Elias sat up, wincing. He checked his gun. He looked at Clara, the woman who had started as a victim and forged herself into iron. For you, he said, I can ride to hell and back. They waited until the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the plains. They managed to catch Dr. Thorne near the watering trough as he was leaving the settlement. He agreed to carry a message to the judge. Ride with us, or we send the ledger to the governor. It was a bluff, mostly, but Wilkes was a coward. And cowards fold when the wind changes. The procession that left Silver Creek that evening was a strange, caravan-like sight. Clara rode in front. She sat upright in the saddle, her back straight, her chin high. She wore no chains. She held the reins with bruised hands. Elias rode beside her, pale and favoring his left side, but armed and watching the horizon. Behind them, in a carriage driven by Dr. Thorne, sat Judge Wilkes, looking like a man being marched to the gallows. They were not running away. They were heading west, back toward the setting sun, back toward the town that had spit them out, back toward Harlan Crow. The wind picked up, howling across the flats. But Clara did not bow her head. She looked straight ahead, toward the darkening horizon where Blackwood waited. She deserved justice, and she was going to go get it. The sun hung directly overhead. A white-hot coin punched into a sheet of pale blue steel. It was high noon in Blackwood, the hour when shadows vanished and the truth had nowhere to hide. The town lay quiet under the heat, but it was a tense, vibrating silence, like the air before a lightning strike. The street looked exactly as it had the day Clara Voss was dragged through it in irons. The boardwalks were warped by the same sun. The dust lay just as thick on the hitching rails, and the windows of the mercantile still displayed the same bolts of calico. But the woman riding down the center of the thoroughfare was not the same woman who had left. Clara sat upright in the saddle of a borrowed gelding, her spine stiff as a rifle barrel. She wore a dress dusty from the trail, and her face was brown from the wind. But her eyes were clear. She did not look down. She did not hide. She rode with the ledger tucked securely inside her jacket, pressed against her heart. Beside her, Elias Boone rode the roan. He sat with a slight list to the left, favoring the side where the bullet had grazed his ribs. His face was drawn, the skin tight over his cheekbones, but his right hand rested easily on his thigh, inches from the worn walnut grip of his Colt. Behind them, the carriage creaked and groaned. Judge Wilkes sat inside, sweating profusely in his wool suit, looking like a man who was being marched to his own execution. Dr. Thorne drove the carriage, his face grim and set. They did not sneak in. They did not use the alleys. They rode straight down Main Street, the horses' hooves kicking up clouds of gold dust. Sheriff Harlan Crow was waiting. He stood on the steps of the jailhouse, his thumbs hooked into his gun belt. He had not underestimated them this time. 6 deputies stood in a semicircle around him, Winchesters cradled in their arms. On the roof of the hotel across the street, the sun glinted off a rifle barrel. Crow had turned the street into a kill box. He smiled as they approached, a practiced expression of weary patience meant for the audience watching from behind curtained windows. "Welcome back, Clara," Crow called out. His voice was smooth, carrying easily in the still air. "I see you have brought the judge. That saves me the trouble of wiring him." Clara pulled her horse up 10 yards from the steps. The silence that followed was heavy. The townspeople began to filter out of the saloon and the general store. Drawn by the spectacle, they stood on the periphery, whispering. The sound rippled like wind through dry grass. "Look at her. She looks wild. Is that the drifter? I heard he was dead. She has got some nerve coming back here." Crow took a step down. He held up a hand, palm out. "You are making a scene. Clara, you have had your run. Now, get down from that horse before someone gets hurt. You are a fugitive from lawful custody." "I am not a fugitive," Clara said. Her voice was not loud, but it was steady. It did not tremble. "I am a citizen of this town, and I have brought the law with me." Crow chuckled, shaking his head. "You brought a hostage. Clara, Judge Wilkes looks like he's about to faint. Now, step down. I will take you into custody, and we can sort this mess out inside, quietly, to protect your dignity." He reached out his hand, just as he had done so many times before, a gesture that looked like help but felt like a cage. "Come on, girl. Do not make this harder than it has to be." Elias nudged the roan forward. He moved the horse until he was physically between Clara and the sheriff, blocking Crow's line of sight. He did not draw his weapon. He simply sat there, a wall of horse and man. "Step aside, Boone," Crow warned, his hand dropping to his pistol. "You are interfering with an officer of the law." Elias looked down at him. His eyes were dark and flat, void of any fear. "She is not going inside with you," Elias said. Crow sneered. "And who are you to decide that? A drifter? A rustler?" Elias leaned forward slightly, resting his forearm on the saddle horn. "I am the man who watched you drag her through the dirt," Elias said. His voice was low, but it carried a weight that silenced the whispers in the street. "You treated her like an animal because she told you no." He paused, letting the words sink in. She deserved justice. "Crow, not chains," a murmur went through the crowd. It was the first crack in the dam. Crow's face tightened. He looked at the deputies. "Arrest them, both of them. If they resist, shoot them down." "Wait," the shout came from the carriage. Judge Wilkes stumbled out. "Doctor," Thorne gripping his elbow to steady him. The judge looked at the rifles pointed at him, then at the ledger Clara had pulled from her jacket. He looked at Crow, and for the first time, his fear of the sheriff was outweighed by his fear of the truth being buried along with him. "There will be no shooting," Wilkes stammered, wiping his face with a handkerchief. "Not yet. The woman claims to have evidence." "Evidence," Crow spat. "She has a stolen book full of lies she wrote herself." "Read it," Clara shouted. She threw the ledger. It spun through the air and landed in the dust at the judge's feet. It fell open, the pages fluttering in the slight breeze. Judge Wilkes bent down and picked it up. His hands shook. He adjusted his spectacles. "Read the entry for the Dillard parcel." Clara commanded, "Read it out loud so every man and woman in this town can hear it." Wilkes cleared his throat. He looked at the page. September 4th. He read, his voice thin and reedy. "Payment to Samuel Dillard, $50. Notation: refusal to sell, obstruction." He turned the page. September 7th. Payment to H. Crow, $500. Source: Union Pacific Land Trust. Notation: acquisition fee for river parcel pending removal of obstruction. The crowd went silent. Removal of obstruction. Samuel Dillard had died on September 7th. "There is more." Clara said, "Look at the bottom." Wilkes looked. Voss. Leverage against silence. No cost. Clara looked at the crowd. She saw the rancher, Samuel's father, standing by the livery stable. His face was gray. "He killed your son," Clara said to the old man. "Samuel would not sell the land because he knew the railroad was coming. He wanted a fair price. Crow was paid to make sure the railroad got it cheap. And when Samuel would not budge, Crow killed him." "Lies!" Crow roared. He took a step forward, his hand hovering over his gun. "She is twisting it. She killed the boy. She is a whore who seduced him and then robbed him." "Doctor." Thorne stepped forward then. He walked into the center of the street, placing himself next to the judge. "I examined the body," Thorne said. His voice was deep and resonant. "And I examined Clara Voss 2 weeks before the murder. She had bruises on her arms, finger marks, large ones. She told me she fell, but I know what a man's grip looks like." Thorne turned to face Crow. "You were squeezing her. Harlan, you were threatening her. I saw you watching her house. I saw you following her." Crow looked around. The deputies were lowering their rifles. The crowd was shifting. The invisible wall of respectability he had built around himself was crumbling. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the shopkeeper. He saw the anger in the eyes of the Dillard family. He turned his glare on Clara. He decided to burn it all down. "You think they care?" Crow snarled, pointing a shaking finger at her. "Look at you. You are nothing. You are a widow who could not keep a husband. You are a woman who runs around the mountains with a saddle tramp. You think because you have a book, you are clean?" He took a step toward her, his voice rising to a fever pitch. "Everyone knows what you are. Clara, you like the attention. You opened the door. You let me in, you let the boy in. And now you are trying to cry wolf because things got rough. Shame on you. Shame is the only thing you have earned." The insults hung in the air, ugly and poisonous. It was the oldest weapon in the world, using a woman's reputation to silence her pain. Clara did not flinch. She did not look away. She nudged her horse forward until she was looking down at him. "You are right," she said clearly. "I did open the door," the crowd gasped. Crow smirked, thinking he had won. "I opened the door because I was hungry." Clara said, "I opened the door because you told me you were the law, and the law protects people. I let you in because I was afraid that if I didn't, I would starve." She looked at the women in the crowd. Mrs. Gable, the church ladies who had shunned her. "He did not touch me with love." Clara said, "He did not touch me with desire. He touched me with ownership. He told me that because I was alone, I belonged to him. He told me that my silence was the rent I paid for living in this town." She looked back at Crow. "You call it shame," she said. "I call it survival, and I am done surviving. I am living, and I am naming you. Harlan Crow, you are a thief, you are a killer, and you are a coward who hides behind a badge because he is not man enough to stand on his own 2 feet. The silence that followed was total. Then, someone spat on the ground. It was the elder Dillard. He walked past the deputies, who did not move to stop him. He looked at Crow with eyes full of hate. "You killed my boy," Dillard rasped. Crow looked at the rancher. He looked at the deputies who were backing away. He looked at the judge who was clutching the ledger like a shield. He was cornered, a rat in a trap. Crow's eyes darted to the alleyway. A horse was tied there. If he could make it. He moved. It was a sudden, violent motion. He drew his Colt, not aiming at Elias or Clara, but firing a wild shot into the air to create chaos. "Get back!" Crow screamed. The crowd scattered, screaming. Horses spooked. Dust rose in a choking cloud. Crow lunged for Clara's horse, grabbing the bridle, trying to pull her down to use as a shield. "Get down!" he roared. Yanking hard, Clara cried out as the horse reared, nearly unseating her. Elias did not hesitate. He had been waiting for this. He had been dreading it, but he was ready for it. He dropped from the saddle, his boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. He ignored the burning pain in his side. He drew his pistol in one fluid motion. Crow saw him. He let go of Clara's horse and swung his gun toward Elias. "Drop it!" Crow shouted. Elias did not yell. He did not make a speech. He saw the man who had tormented Clara. He saw the man who had killed Rourke. He saw the threat that would never end as long as Crow drew breath. Elias fired. One shot. It cracked through the chaos, louder than the screaming, louder than the wind. Crow jerked backward as if he had been kicked by a mule. His hat flew off. His gun clattered to the boardwalk. He stood for a second, looking surprised, his hand going to his chest where a dark stain was blossoming on his white shirt. He fell to his knees. Then he pitched forward into the dust, face down. The silence returned, rushing back into the street like water filling a void. Elias stood there, his gun still raised, smoke drifting from the barrel. He was breathing hard, his face pale. He lowered the weapon slowly. He did not look triumphant. He looked heavy. He looked like a man who had just taken on a weight he would carry for the rest of his life. Clara slid down from her horse. She pushed through the dust, ignoring the staring eyes. She went to Elias. She did not look at Crow's body. She looked at Elias. She saw the tremor in his hand. She reached out and covered his hand with hers, gently pushing the gun down until he holstered it. "It is over," she whispered. Judge Wilkes stepped forward, looking at the body. He signaled to the deputies. "Secure the scene," Wilkes said, his voice regaining some authority now that the danger was dead. "And someone fetch the undertaker." The aftermath was a blur of motion and noise. But for Clara and Elias, it felt distant. The ledger was taken into evidence. "Doctor." Thorne gave a formal statement. The elder Dillard came to Clara, taking her hands in his calloused ones, weeping as he apologized for believing the lies. The town began to breathe again. The whispers changed. They were no longer cruel. They were shocked, apologetic, awed. "Did you see her? Did you hear what she said?" Clara was formally cleared of all charges before the sun set. The judge signed the paper on the hood of the carriage. Her name was clean on paper. But as she walked down the street toward the doctor's clinic where Elias was being treated, she could feel the eyes on her. The gossip would not die. It never did. She would no longer be the Black Widow, but she would be the woman who brought down the sheriff. She would be the woman who slept in the mountains. She would never just be Clara again. She found Elias sitting on the edge of a cot in the back room of the clinic. "Doctor." Thorne had rebandaged his side and given him a stiff drink of whiskey. Elias was staring at the floor, his hat in his hands. He looked up when she entered. "He is dead," Elias said flatly. "Yes," Clara said. "And you are free," he said. Clara walked over and stood in front of him. "I am cleared. There is a difference." Elias nodded. He stood up, wincing slightly. He picked up his coat. "I should go," he said. Clara felt a cold, sharp panic in her chest. "Go? Where?" "The road," Elias said. He did not meet her eyes. "I killed a lawman." "Clara." Even if he was crooked, it puts a mark on a man. And look at me. I am a drifter. I have nothing to offer you but a saddle and a gun. You can have your life back now. You can sell the house, maybe move east, start over where no one knows. He started to move past her toward the door. It was his old instinct, the flight response, before the love became a trap, before he ruined her. Clara moved fast. She slammed her hand against the doorframe, blocking his path. "Do not you dare," she said. Elias stopped. "Clara, you do not get to decide for me," she said, her voice fierce. "You do not get to decide that you are not good enough. You do not get to decide that I want a safe, easy life in the East." She grabbed the lapels of his coat and pulled him to face her. "I have spent my whole life letting men decide where I belong," she said. "My father, my husband, Crow, the town. They all told me who I was." She looked him in the eye. "Stay if you want. Elias, go if you must. If the road is calling you, then ride, but do not go because you think you are saving me. I do not need saving anymore. I need a partner." Elias looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw. He saw the woman who had walked into hell beside him and come out carrying the water. He dropped his hat. He reached out and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her careful against his wounded side. "I do not want to go," he whispered into her hair. "I never want to go." "Then stay," she said. That night, they stayed in a small room at the boarding house. They did not care what the landlady thought. The intimacy they shared was not frantic like it had been in the mountains. It was slow, it was deep. It was the reclaiming of warmth. They lay together under the quilt, listening to the wind rattle the window pane, knowing that for the first time, no one was coming to kick down the door. They talked in the dark. "I cannot stay in Blackwood," Clara said, tracing the line of his jaw with her finger. "The ghosts are too loud here. I saw a valley once." Elias said, "West of here, over the divide, good water, tall grass. It is hard country, but it is honest. We could build something," Clara said. "Not a shack, a home. It will be hard work," Elias warned. "And people might talk. Let them talk." Clara said, "I have faced down a sheriff and a hanging judge. I think I can handle a little gossip." Elias kissed her forehead. "A valley, then." They left 2 days later. It was a quiet departure. They did not sneak out, but they did not make a parade of it. They loaded a pack mule with supplies. Clara sold her house to the Dillards, who bought it at a fair price as a peace offering. They rode out past the cemetery, where Rourke was buried. They paused to pay their respects, leaving a bottle of good whiskey on the fresh earth. Then they turned their horses west. The landscape opened up before them, wide, unforgiving, and beautiful. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and crowned with white. The air was crisp and smelled of sagebrush and freedom. They rode side by side. Clara sat tall, her face turned toward the sun. Elias rode with his hat pulled low, his eyes scanning the horizon, not for threats, but for the future. They carried scars. They carried memories that would wake them up in the middle of the night. But they also carried something else, a trust that had been forged in fire, a love that had stood in the doorway of a jail cell and refused to blink. As they crested the final ridge, the town of Blackwood disappeared behind them, swallowed by the vastness of the territory. They did not look back. There was nothing there for them anymore. Ahead lay the valley. Ahead lay the work. Ahead lay a life that wasn't clean and wasn't easy. But it was theirs. The wind blew across the prairie, wild and free, and for the first time in a long time, it sounded like a song. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Clara and Elias as much as I enjoyed writing it for you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and grit, please make sure to subscribe to From Wild West. We have many more stories to tell about the frontier, the people who survived it, and the love that bloomed in the hard places. Please share your thoughts on the ending in the comments in English. Did they make the right choice leaving town? I look forward to reading your words. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.